The Oklahoma sun beat down on Fort Sill, its heat a tangible force that pressed against the skin, carrying the acrid tang of diesel and scorched earth. Dust swirled in lazy spirals around the motor pool, where the hulking silhouettes of M1 Abrams tanks squatted under the midday glare. Amid the clatter of wrenches and the low growl of idling engines, a young woman stood apart, her silhouette sharp against the haze. Her name was Abigail Carter, though no one bothered to ask. Her mechanic's coveralls, streaked with grease, hung loose on her slight frame, and her eyes, steady, unyielding, fixed on the lead tank, its engine silent, a stubborn beast refusing to stir. The air carried the weight of judgment. A cluster of officers, their starched uniforms crisp despite the heat, stood near the tank, their voices sharp with frustration. General Marcus Tate, his silver hair glinting under his cap, gestured with a controlled fury that made his subordinates flinch. "This is unacceptable," he snapped, his words slicing through the din. "The Secretary of Defense is en route, and our flagship tank is dead in the water. Get it running, now!" His gaze swept the motor pool, landing briefly on Abigail, who stood motionless by a toolbox, her hands clasped behind her back. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of dismissal, before he turned away, as if her presence were an afterthought, a civilian intrusion in a world of rank and order. Abigail's jaw tightened, her fingers curling into fists, nails biting into her palms. She felt the sting of that glance, the unspoken assumption that she was out of place, a nobody in a space reserved for those who wore their authority on their sleeves. Yet beneath her silence burned a quiet fire, a knowledge honed in the long nights spent poring over schematics in her father's cluttered garage. Her father, Elias Carter, had been a master mechanic at Fort Sill before a heart attack claimed him 2 years prior, leaving behind a legacy of grease-stained manuals and a daughter who absorbed them like scripture. Abigail, now 20, had no formal training, no rank, no insignia to flash. But she knew the Abrams systems, their quirks, their secrets, better than most of the men sweating over the stalled engine. The motor pool buzzed with controlled chaos. Master Sergeant Daniel Voss, a wiry man with hands scarred from years of wrench work, barked orders at a trio of mechanics, their faces slick with sweat as they wrestled with the tank's engine compartment. "Fuel lines are clear," one of them muttered, his voice tinged with desperation. "Ignition's not catching. Could be electrical, but we've checked the damn circuits twice." Voss shook his head, his eyes darting to the horizon where a convoy of black SUVs would soon appear, carrying Pentagon brass expecting a flawless display of military might. Abigail shifted her weight, the soles of her boots grinding against the gravel. She could hear it, the faint, irregular sputter in the engine's last attempt to start, a clue buried in the noise like a whisper in a storm. It wasn't electrical. It was the fuel pump's secondary relay, a component notorious for failing under high heat, a detail she'd found buried in a maintenance report her father had annotated years ago. She stepped forward, her voice low but clear. "Sergeant Voss, I think I know what's wrong." The motor pool seemed to pause, the clatter of tools faltering as heads turned. Voss squinted at her, his brow furrowing. "You're Elias's kid, right? Abigail?" His tone was cautious, not unkind, but laced with the skepticism of a man who trusted only what he could see and touch. "This ain't a backyard fix, Carter. We've got trained techs on this." "I know," Abigail said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "But I've seen this before. The secondary fuel pump relay, it's overheating. If you bypass it and check the pressure differential, you'll see the problem." She held his gaze, her eyes unflinching, though her heart pounded like a piston. General Tate's head snapped toward her, his expression a mix of irritation and incredulity. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "A civilian playing mechanic in my motor pool?" His laugh was sharp, a blade meant to cut her down to size. The other officers exchanged glances, their postures stiff, unsure whether to intervene or let the general's disdain run its course. Abigail stood her ground, the weight of their stares pressing against her like the Oklahoma heat. She could feel the contradiction within her, fierce confidence in her knowledge, shadowed by the doubt that came from years of being overlooked. Her father had taught her to listen to machines, to hear their stories in the hum of their parts, but he'd also warned her about the world's tendency to dismiss what didn't fit its mold. "Sir," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. "If I'm wrong, you lose nothing. If I'm right, your tank runs for the demonstration." Voss hesitated, his eyes flicking between Abigail and the general. He knew her father's reputation, the man who could coax life from a dead engine with nothing but intuition and a wrench. "General," Voss said carefully, "it'll take 10 minutes to test her theory." "We're running out of time." Tate's jaw clenched, his eyes boring into Abigail as if weighing her worth against the risk of humiliation. The silence stretched, taut as a wire, broken only by the distant hum of an approaching convoy. Finally, he gave a curt nod. 10 minutes, Sergeant. If this fails, it's on you." Voss motioned Abigail forward, his expression unreadable. She moved to the tank, her hands steady as she opened the engine compartment, the metal hot under her fingers. The mechanics watched, their skepticism a palpable weight, but she tuned it out, focusing on the familiar maze of wires and components. She attached a pressure gauge to the fuel line, her movements precise, almost reverent. The gauge's needle flickered, confirming her suspicion. The secondary relay was choking the fuel flow. "It's the relay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might scare the truth away. Voss leaned over, his eyes narrowing at the gauge. "Damn," he muttered, a grudging respect creeping into his tone. "She's right." He turned to his team, barking orders to replace the relay, his urgency a silent acknowledgement of Abigail's insight. The mechanics scrambled, tools flashing in the sunlight, as the tank began to hum with renewed life. Abigail stepped back, wiping her hands on her coveralls, her heart a steady drumbeat of vindication. She felt the shift in the air, the officers' glances no longer dismissive, but curious, even wary. General Tate's expression remained unreadable, his arms crossed, but his silence spoke louder than his earlier scorn. The tank's engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that rolled across the motor pool like thunder, drowning out the murmurs of disbelief. As the convoy's dust cloud grew closer, Abigail caught sight of a woman stepping from one of the SUVs, her suit sharp against the rugged backdrop. Dr. Evelyn Harper, a Pentagon analyst known for her relentless pursuit of innovation, surveyed the scene with keen eyes. She approached, her gaze locking onto Abigail, who stood slightly apart, her coveralls a stark contrast to the polished uniforms around her. "Who diagnosed the issue?" Harper asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Voss hesitated, then nodded toward Abigail. "She did, ma'am. Civilian, Abigail Carter." Harper's eyes narrowed, not with dismissal, but with something sharper. Recognition, perhaps, of potential untapped. "Carter," she said, as if testing the name's weight. "You've got a knack. Where'd you learn it?" Abigail's throat tightened, the question stirring memories of her father's calloused hands guiding hers over engine parts, his voice steady as he explained their secrets. "My dad," she said simply, the words carrying more weight than she intended. "He taught me to listen to machines." Harper's lips twitched, a hint of a smile, but before she could respond, the tank's engine surged again, its roar a testament to Abigail's unseen triumph. The demonstration was moments away, the Pentagon delegation assembling, their expectations high. Abigail felt the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken question of whether her moment of brilliance would be forgotten or remembered. Then, a shadow fell across the gravel, a wheelchair, its wheels crunching softly. Margaret Carter, Abigail's mother, her face etched with lines of pain and pride, maneuvered toward her daughter. Her presence was a jolt, a reminder of the family's fractured history with the military, her mother's career as a logistics officer cut short by injury. "Abigail," she said, her voice low, trembling with something unspoken. "What are you doing here?" The question hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken grief, of a mother's fear clashing with a daughter's need to prove herself. Abigail met her mother's gaze, her own eyes steady but soft, a silent plea for understanding. The tank's rumble faded into the background, leaving only the weight of that moment, the fragile bridge between them teetering on the edge of collapse or connection. The Fort Sill motor pool buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with the scent of oil and sun-baked metal. The M1 Abrams tank, now alive with a throaty rumble, stood as a testament to Abigail Carter's quiet triumph. Yet the weight of her mother's gaze pressed heavier than the Oklahoma heat. Margaret Carter's wheelchair cast a shadow across the gravel, her eyes, sharp with a mix of fury and fear, locked on her daughter. Abigail stood rooted, her grease-streaked hands clenched at her sides, feeling the silent accusation in her mother's stare, a betrayal of promises made to steer clear of the military's pull. Margaret's voice cut through the engine's growl, low but piercing. "Abigail, you know why I told you to stay away from this place." Her words carried the ache of old wounds, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair, knuckles pale against the worn leather. Once a logistics officer who orchestrated supply lines with precision, Margaret had been sidelined by a convoy ambush in Iraq, her legs lost to shrapnel, her faith in the military shattered by bureaucracy that valued procedure over people. She had forbidden Abigail from touching the world that had broken her, fearing it would claim her daughter too. Abigail's throat tightened, her voice soft but steady. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, Mom. I fixed it. I had to." Her eyes flicked to the tank, its armor gleaming under the sun, a machine she understood better than the rift between them. She wanted to say more, to explain how the hum of engines felt like her father's voice, how solving their puzzles honored his memory. But the words caught, trapped by the fear of deepening her mother's pain. Dr. Evelyn Harper, the Pentagon analyst, observed the exchange from a distance, her notepad forgotten in her hand. Her sharp eyes caught the tension, the unspoken history that hung between mother and daughter like a frayed rope. She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the gravel, her presence a quiet intrusion. "Mrs. Carter," she said, her tone measured but warm, "your daughter's diagnostic skill saved a critical demonstration today. Her knowledge is extraordinary." Harper's words were meant to bridge, but they landed like a spark on dry grass. Margaret's gaze shifted to Harper, her expression hardening. "Extraordinary or not, she's my daughter. This," she gestured toward the tank, the motor pool, the uniformed figures. "This takes everything and gives nothing back but scars." Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the ferocity of a mother protecting what remained of her family. The officers nearby shifted uncomfortably, their polished boots scuffing the dirt, aware of the personal unfolding in their professional domain. General Marcus Tate, standing near the tank, cleared his throat, his authority a heavy cloak despite his unease. "Mrs. Carter, I assure you, Abigail's involvement was strictly supervised. No risks were taken." His tone aimed for reassurance, but it carried the stiffness of a man unaccustomed to justifying his decisions, especially to a civilian whose pain outranked his stars. Margaret's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass, supervised. "You think that's what keeps people safe? I was supervised when my convoy went up in flames." Her eyes flicked to Abigail, softening for a moment, then hardening again. "You're not part of this, Abigail." "You're not." Abigail felt the words like a physical blow, her chest tightening with the contradiction of her mother's love and her own need to prove herself. She took a step toward Margaret, her boots crunching softly. "Mom, I'm not enlisting." "I'm not fighting. I know these machines. I can make them better." "Safer." Her voice wavered, but her eyes held steady, pleading for a crack in her mother's resolve. Master Sergeant Daniel Voss, who had overseen the repair, approached cautiously, his scarred hands clasped behind his back. He had seen too many family fractures on military bases, too many dreams crushed by trauma's long shadow. "Ma'am," he said to Margaret, his voice low, respectful, "Abigail's diagnosis wasn't just luck. She spotted a problem I've seen stump mechanics with decades of experience. Her work could keep soldiers safer. People like you were." Margaret's gaze flickered to Voss, her skepticism a wall, but his words found a chink. She knew his type, enlisted, practical, the kind who valued results over rank. Her fingers loosened slightly on her armrests, her silence a question rather than a rejection. Abigail seized the moment, her voice quiet but urgent. "Mom, Dad taught me to fix things, to listen to them. If I can use that to prevent what happened to you, doesn't that mean something?" The motor pool fell quiet, the tank's idling engine the only sound, a steady pulse like a heartbeat. Margaret's eyes glistened, her jaw tight as she wrestled with memories, of her husband's gentle hands on engine parts, of her own pride in serving, now buried under years of pain. She looked at Abigail, seeing not just her daughter, but the echo of Elias, the man who believed machines could tell stories if you listened closely enough. "Doctor." Harper stepped forward again, sensing the shift. "Mrs. Carter, there are civilian programs, engineering, research, design that need people like Abigail. No uniforms, no deployments, just her mind, her skills, making equipment more reliable." She pulled a card from her pocket, offering it to Margaret. "The Pentagon funds scholarships for this. She could study, innovate, contribute, safely." Margaret took the card, her fingers brushing the embossed seal, her expression unreadable. The offer was a lifeline, a way to honor Abigail's talent without surrendering her to the military's hunger. But it also meant letting go of the control she'd clung to since her injury, the shield she'd built to protect her daughter from a world that had broken her. General Tate, sensing the need to regain control, addressed the gathering crowd of officers and mechanics. "Let's prepare for the demonstration," he said, his voice firm but less sharp, as if Abigail's success had softened his edges. "Ms. Carter, your contribution is noted, but this is a military operation. Civilians don't belong in the operator's seat." His words were a reminder, a line drawn, but they lacked the venom of his earlier dismissal. Abigail nodded, accepting the boundary, but her eyes drifted to the tank, its turret gleaming like a challenge. She felt the pull of its systems, the urge to prove she could do more than diagnose, could operate, command, make it sing. The thought was reckless, dangerous, yet it burned in her chest, a silent rebellion against the limits others set. As the Pentagon delegation assembled, their polished shoes kicking up dust, a new figure emerged from the crowd. Lieutenant Sarah Klein, a young officer with a reputation for precision in tank operations, approached Abigail. Her uniform was crisp, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "You're the one who fixed the Abrams?" she asked, her tone free of judgment, only interest. Abigail nodded, wary of the officer's intent. Klein leaned closer, her voice low. "I've read the manuals, I know the systems, but you saw something we didn't." "How?" Abigail hesitated, then spoke, her words careful but confident. "It's not just the manuals, it's listening. The engine's rhythm, the way it hesitates. My dad said every machine has a voice. You just have to hear it." Klein's eyes widened slightly, a spark of recognition, as if Abigail had named something she'd felt but never articulated. The demonstration began, the tank rolling forward with a rumble that shook the ground. Abigail watched, her heart racing, not with pride but with a restless hunger. She had fixed the machine, earned a moment of respect, but it wasn't enough. The officers' glances, her mother's fear, the general's boundaries, they all told her she was still an outsider. her value measured only by their terms. As the tank maneuvered, its turret swiveling with mechanical grace, Dr. Harper approached Margaret again, her voice soft. "Mrs. Carter, Abigail's talent could change how we maintain these machines, but she needs your support to find her place." Margaret's eyes followed the tank, then returned to her daughter, who stood alone, her face a mask of quiet determination. The demonstration paused, the tank idling as Lieutenant Klein climbed from the hatch, her expression troubled. She conferred with Voss, their voices low but urgent. "Something's off with the targeting system," Klein said, loud enough for Abigail to hear. "It's not calibrating right." Voss frowned, checking his tablet, then glanced at Abigail, a silent question in his eyes. Abigail's pulse quickened. She knew the targeting system, its sensors, its software, the delicate dance of calibration. She could fix it, prove herself again. But her mother's presence loomed, a warning of the cost. She took a step forward, then stopped, her eyes meeting Margaret's. The silence between them was deafening, a crossroads where trust could either break or be rebuilt. The Fort Sill motor pool thrummed with tension, the M1 Abrams tank idling like a beast caught mid-breath. Its turret, moments ago a symbol of mechanical prowess, now betrayed a subtle flaw, a targeting system refusing to align, its digital pulse erratic. The Oklahoma sun bore down, baking the gravel and casting sharp shadows across the faces of the gathered crowd. Abigail Carter stood at the edge of the scene, her grease-stained coveralls a stark contrast to the polished uniforms around her. Her mother, Margaret, sat rigid in her wheelchair, her eyes locked on her daughter, a storm of fear and pride brewing beneath her silence. Lieutenant Sarah Klein, her face taut with frustration, climbed down from the tank's turret, her boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. She conferred with Master Sergeant Daniel Voss, their voices hushed but urgent, the words calibration error and sensor misalignment cutting through the air. The Pentagon delegation, led by Dr. Evelyn Harper, watched with keen interest, their notebooks open, pens poised. General Marcus Tate's jaw tightened, his arms crossed, his authority challenged by yet another glitch in what was meant to be a flawless display of military might. Abigail's fingers twitched at her sides, her mind racing through the tank's fire control system, its laser rangefinder, ballistic computer, the delicate interplay of sensors that demanded precision. She knew the issue, a misaligned thermal sensor, likely thrown off by the earlier fuel pump repair, a subtle vibration disrupting its calibration. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, his calloused hand pointing to a schematic. "Machines talk, Abby. You just gotta know their language." She took a half step forward, then froze, her eyes flicking to her mother. Margaret's gaze was a weight, heavy with the unspoken plea to stay safe, to stay away. Voss caught Abigail's movement, his scarred brow lifting. "Carter," he said, his voice low but carrying over the engine's rumble. "You got a theory on this one too?" His tone held no mockery, only the pragmatic curiosity of a man who respected results over rank. The mechanics nearby paused, their tools still, their eyes on Abigail, waiting for her to speak or retreat. General Tate's head snapped toward her, his expression a mix of irritation and grudging curiosity. "Sergeant, we don't have time for civilian guesses," he said, but his voice lacked the earlier venom, softened by Abigail's proven diagnostic skill. The delegation's presence loomed, their scrutiny a silent demand for competence, and Tate's control was slipping, one mechanical failure at a time. Abigail's chest tightened, her breath shallow. She felt the contradiction within her, confidence in her knowledge, shadowed by the fear of overstepping, of deepening the rift with her mother. But the tank's silence, its targeting system faltering, called to her like a challenge she couldn't ignore. "It's the thermal sensor," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "The fuel pump repair caused a vibration. It's misaligned the sensor's mounting bracket. You need to recalibrate it manually. Klein's eyes narrowed, her hands on her hips. You're saying a vibration threw off the entire fire control system? Her tone was skeptical, but not dismissive, her gaze searching Abigail's face for certainty. That's not in the standard troubleshooting protocol. It's not, Abigail admitted, her voice steady despite the weight of attention. But I've seen it before. My dad dealt with a similar issue on a Bradley years ago. The fix is simple. Adjust the bracket and run a manual calibration. She pointed to the turret, her finger tracing an invisible line to the sensor housing, her certainty a quiet force. Voss exchanged a glance with Klein, then nodded. Worth a shot. We're running out of options. He turned to his team, barking orders to access the sensor housing. The mechanics moved with practiced efficiency, their tools flashing in the sunlight, but their eyes kept darting to Abigail, as if reassessing her presence. Margaret's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests, her knuckles white. Abigail, she said, her voice low, trembling with barely restrained emotion. This isn't your place. You don't owe them anything. Her words were a plea, but they carried the edge of a command, rooted in years of trauma. Her own career shattered by machines that failed when it mattered most. Abigail knelt beside her mother, her eyes soft but unyielding. Mom, I'm not trying to be you. I'm trying to make things better. If I can fix this, it means fewer soldiers get hurt. Fewer families like ours. Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the engine's hum, but it carried a conviction that made Margaret's breath catch. Dr. Harper stepped closer, her notepad tucked under her arm, her eyes sharp with interest. Mrs. Carter, she said, her tone diplomatic but firm, Abigail's insight could prevent operational failures that put lives at risk. Her talent isn't just theoretical, it's practical, measurable. We need people like her. Harper's words were a bridge, an attempt to align Margaret's protective instincts with Abigail's proven ability. Margaret's gaze flickered between Harper and her daughter, her expression a battlefield of fear and reluctant pride. She remembered her own days of command, the trust she'd placed in machines that betrayed her, and the daughter who now seemed to speak their language better than anyone. Her silence stretched, heavy with the weight of reconsidering her own boundaries. Voss's voice broke the moment, calling from the tank. Carter, you're right. The bracket's off by a hair. We're adjusting it now. The mechanics worked swiftly, realigning the sensor, their movements precise under Voss's watchful eye. Klein climbed back into the turret, her fingers dancing over the control panel as she initiated the calibration sequence. The targeting system's display flickered, then steadied, green lights confirming alignment. The tank's turret swiveled smoothly, its aim true, and a ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. The Pentagon delegation scribbled notes, their faces a mix of relief and intrigue. General Tate's arms uncrossed, his posture easing, though his eyes lingered on Abigail with a wariness that hadn't fully dissipated. Good work, Sergeant, he said to Voss, his tone careful, as if reluctant to acknowledge the civilian at the heart of the fix. Klein emerged from the turret, her expression a blend of respect and curiosity. She approached Abigail, her voice low. You nailed it. How'd you know the vibration would affect the sensor? Her question was genuine, a soldier seeking to learn from someone she'd underestimated. Abigail's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through her reserve. It's like a heartbeat. You listen for the skip, the thing that's out of rhythm. My dad taught me to hear it. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of inherited wisdom, a legacy that grounded her in the face of scrutiny. Harper, overhearing, made a note, her mind already racing with possibilities, civilian programs, engineering scholarships, a way to harness Abigail's talent without the military claiming her entirely. She turned to General Tate, her voice measured. General, Abigail's skills could be a game-changer for maintenance protocols. We should discuss formalizing her involvement, safely, of course. Tate's jaw tightened, his instinct to maintain order clashing with the evidence of Abigail's value. "Doctor!" "Harper, civilians don't run military operations. Her contribution is noted, but we have protocols for a reason." His words were firm, but they lacked the conviction of his earlier dismissals, as if Abigail's success had cracked his certainty. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her protective instincts flaring at the mention of involvement. She wheeled closer to Abigail, her voice low but fierce. "You've done enough, Abby. They don't get to pull you into their world just because you're good at this." Her words were a shield, but they trembled with the fear of losing her daughter to the same institution that had taken so much from her. Abigail's heart pounded, torn between her mother's pain and the pull of her own potential. She knelt again, her hand resting lightly on Margaret's arm. "Mom, I'm not signing up. I'm not going anywhere." "But if I can help make these machines safer, isn't that worth something?" Her voice was soft, but it carried a quiet strength, a plea for trust in a moment where everything hung in balance. Before Margaret could respond, a sharp beep from the tank's control panel cut through the air. Klein frowned, checking the display, her voice rising with urgency. "Sergeant, we've got a warning light on the hydraulic system. It's not critical, but it's new." Voss cursed under his breath, moving to the tank, his eyes flicking to Abigail, a silent question forming. The crowd's attention shifted, the delegation murmuring, Tate's face darkening. Abigail felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken expectation that she could solve this too. Her mother's gaze burned into her, a warning and a challenge, as the tank's hydraulic system whined, its rhythm off, a new puzzle demanding her attention. She stood, her hands steady, but her heart racing, knowing this moment could either cement her place or widen the chasm between her and the only family she had left. The Fort Sill motor pool pulsed with unease, the M1 Abrams tank's hydraulic system emitting a low, irregular whine that cut through the Oklahoma heat like a warning. Dust clung to the air, gritty against the skin, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the gravel. Abigail Carter stood at the edge of the crowd, her grease-stained coveralls a badge of her quiet rebellion. Her mother, Margaret, gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her eyes sharp with a fear that felt like a physical weight pressing against Abigail's chest. The Pentagon delegation, their suits stark against the rugged backdrop, watched with a mix of intrigue and impatience, their pens scratching notes that could shape careers and budgets. Lieutenant Sarah Klein leaned out of the tank's hatch, her face etched with concern as she studied the control panel's warning light. "Hydraulic pressures fluctuating," she called to Master Sergeant Daniel Voss, her voice steady but tight. "It's not a full failure, but it's enough to throw off the turret's response time." Voss, his scarred hands already reaching for a diagnostic tablet, cursed softly, his eyes darting to Abigail. The unspoken question hung between them. Could she solve this too? General Marcus Tate's posture stiffened, his arms uncrossed now, hands clenched at his sides. "Sergeant, get this under control," he snapped, his voice a blade slicing through the murmurs. "The delegation expects perfection, not excuses." His gaze flicked to Abigail, a flicker of reluctant acknowledgement warring with his instinct to maintain order. Her earlier successes, diagnosing the fuel pump and thermal sensor, had cracked his certainty, but his need to uphold military protocol held firm. Abigail's pulse quickened, her mind already dissecting the hydraulic system's schematics, a mental map built from her father's old manuals. The whine suggested a pressure leak, likely in the auxiliary pump's bypass valve, a component prone to wear under prolonged heat, a detail she'd memorized from a faded troubleshooting guide. She stepped forward, her boots crunching on the gravel, her voice low but clear. "It's the bypass valve," she said, addressing Voss. "The pressure's dropping because the valve's not sealing properly." "You need to check the O-ring for wear." Voss's brow lifted, his skepticism tempered by her proven track record. "That's a specific call, Carter," he said, his tone carrying a grudging respect. "You sure about this?" He glanced at Klein, who nodded slightly, her curiosity outweighing her doubt. The mechanics nearby paused, their tools still, waiting for the next move in this unfolding drama. Margaret's voice cut through, sharp and raw. "Abigail, enough!" Her wheelchair rolled forward, the wheels grinding against the gravel, her face pale with a fury born of fear. "You're not their mechanic. You're not part of this." Her words trembled, carrying the weight of her own shattered dreams. Years spent coordinating supply lines, only to be broken by a single moment of violence. She saw the military as a thief, stealing lives under the guise of duty, and now it threatened to claim her daughter. Abigail knelt beside her mother, her hands hovering, wanting to touch but afraid to bridge the gap. "Mom, I'm not joining them. I'm just fixing what's broken. If I can stop these machines from failing, it could save someone like you." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the tank's whine, but it carried a quiet fire, a plea for understanding rooted in love and defiance. Dr. Evelyn Harper, the Pentagon analyst, watched the exchange, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She stepped closer, her heels silent now, her voice measured. "Mrs. Carter, Abigail's skills could redefine how we maintain these systems. Civilian engineers with her insight are rare. She could work in a lab, not a battlefield." Harper's words were calculated, offering a path that honored Abigail's talent while addressing Margaret's fears. Margaret's gaze flickered to Harper, her skepticism a fortress, but the offer planted a seed. Her fingers loosened on her armrests, her silence a crack in her resolve. She looked at Abigail, seeing her daughter's determination, the echo of her late husband's quiet genius. The memory of Elias, his hands stained with grease, his voice patient as he taught Abigail to listen to engines, stirred something deep, a pride she'd buried under years of grief. Voss, ignoring the family tension, motioned to his team. "Check the bypass valve," he ordered, his voice cutting through the moment. The mechanics moved swiftly, dismantling the hydraulic assembly with practiced precision. Abigail stood, her eyes locked on the tank, her mind racing through the repair process. The O-ring, if worn, would be a small fix, a matter of minutes. But the stakes felt monumental, each action a test of her worth in a world that doubted her place. The mechanics confirmed her diagnosis within moments, pulling a degraded O-ring from the valve, its rubber cracked from heat and strain. "She's right," one of them muttered, holding up the faulty component like evidence in a trial. Voss nodded, his expression a mix of amazement and respect. "Replace it. Now." The team worked with urgency, the tank's whine softening as the new O-ring sealed the system, pressure stabilizing. Klein tested the controls, the turret responding with smooth precision. She climbed out, her eyes finding Abigail's. "You're 3 for 3, Carter," she said, her tone warm with admiration. "I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad you're here." Her words were a quiet validation, a soldier recognizing a peer, regardless of rank or title. General Tate's expression remained guarded, his arms crossed again, but his silence spoke volumes. The delegation murmured, their notes growing frantic, Harper scribbling with particular intensity. She approached Abigail, her voice low. "Your diagnostic accuracy is exceptional. Have you considered formal training? There are programs, civilian, fully funded, that could take you far." Abigail's heart leapt, but her eyes flicked to her mother, whose silence was louder than any protest. Margaret's face was a mask of conflict, her hands trembling slightly. The Pentagon's offer a lifeline she wasn't ready to grasp. "She's not your project," Margaret said to Harper, her voice low but fierce. "She's my daughter." Harper nodded, undeterred. "I understand." But her talent could save lives, without her ever stepping onto a battlefield. Think about that. Her words hung in the air, a challenge to Margaret's fears, a promise of a different future. The tank's engine roared back to full power, the demonstration resuming as the delegation turned their attention to the display. Abigail watched, her chest tight with a mix of pride and unease. She had proven herself again, but each fix drew her deeper into a world her mother feared, a world that both rejected and needed her. The crowd's focus shifted, but Voss lingered, his eyes on Abigail. "You've got a gift, Carter," he said quietly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Before Abigail could respond, a new sound cut through the motor pool, a sharp crackle from the tank's communication system, followed by static. Klein frowned, climbing back into the turret, her voice rising. "Comms are down. We've got no radio link." The delegation's murmurs grew sharper, Tate's face darkening as another flaw threatened the demonstration's success. Abigail's mind raced, her knowledge of the tank's systems kicking into overdrive. The communication system was complex, but she knew its weak points. Likely a loose antenna connection or a fried circuit board, both fixable if caught early. She glanced at Voss, who nodded almost imperceptibly, a silent invitation to step forward. But Margaret's eyes burned into her, a warning of the cost of crossing that line again. The static crackled louder, a challenge to Abigail's courage, her skill, and the fragile trust she was fighting to build with the only family she had left. The Fort Sill motor pool vibrated with the M1 Abrams tank's steady rumble, but a sharp crackle of static from its communication system sliced through the air, a discordant note in the Oklahoma dusk. The sun hung low, painting the gravel in hues of amber and shadow, the heat now a lingering weight rather than a searing force. Abigail Carter stood at the edge of the scene, her grease-streaked coveralls damp with sweat, her hands flexing as if itching to grasp the problem. Her mother, Margaret, sat in her wheelchair, her face a mask of restrained anguish, her eyes pleading for Abigail to step back from the military's pull. Lieutenant Sarah Klein leaned out of the tank's hatch, her brow furrowed as she toggled the radio controls, the static growing louder, a persistent hiss that mocked the demonstration's precision. "Comms are completely down," she called to Master Sergeant Daniel Voss, her voice tight with urgency. "No signal, no link. We're blind for the Pentagon's evaluation." The delegation, clustered near the tank, exchanged glances, their notebooks open, their expressions shifting from intrigue to concern. Dr. Evelyn Harper's pen paused, her sharp eyes locking on to Abigail, as if sensing her potential to salvage the moment. General Marcus Tate's posture stiffened, his jaw a hard line. "Sergeant, fix this now," he barked, his voice carrying the weight of a career on the line. "The Secretary of Defense doesn't wait for excuses." His gaze swept the motor pool, landing briefly on Abigail, a flicker of reluctant acknowledgement in his eyes. Her string of successes, fuel pump, thermal sensor, hydraulic valve, had chipped away at his dismissal, but his need for control held firm, a barrier against her civilian presence. Abigail's mind raced, dissecting the tank's communication system. Antenna, wiring harness, circuit board, power supply. The static suggested a loose connection or a shorted circuit, likely in the antenna's coaxial cable, a common failure point under vibration stress. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, calm and deliberate. "Machines don't hide their problems, Abby. They scream them if you know where to listen." She took a step forward, her boots crunching softly, then hesitated, her eyes meeting her mother's. Margaret's hands gripped her wheelchair, her silence louder than the static, a warning etched in every line of her face. Voss caught her movement, his scarred brow lifting. "Carter, you got something?" His voice was low, practical, a mechanic's respect for results overriding protocol. The other mechanics paused, their tools still, their eyes on Abigail, waiting for her to claim the moment or retreat under her mother's gaze. Abigail's chest tightened, her breath shallow. She felt the contradiction within her, absolute certainty in her diagnosis, shadowed by the fear of fracturing her mother's fragile trust. "It's the coaxial cable," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of attention. "Vibration from the earlier repairs probably loosened the antenna connection. Check the cable at the turret base." She pointed, her finger precise, tracing an invisible line to the problem. Klein's eyes narrowed, her hand still on the radio controls. "That's not in the standard checklist," she said, her tone probing rather than dismissive. "You sure it's not the circuit board?" Abigail nodded, her certainty a quiet force. Circuit boards fail silently or with distortion, not static. "The cable's the weak link here." Voss exchanged a glance with Klein, then nodded. "Let's check it." He motioned to a mechanic who scrambled to the turret, tools clanking. The crowd held its breath, the delegation's murmurs fading as the mechanic inspected the antenna base. Within moments, he held up a coaxial cable, its connector slightly loose, the shielding frayed from wear. "She's right," he called, his voice tinged with awe. "Cable's the issue." Margaret's hands trembled. Her eyes locked on Abigail, a storm of emotions, pride, fear, anger, warring within her. "Abigail, stop," she said, her voice low but cutting, like a blade honed by years of loss. "You're proving their point, not yours. They'll pull you in, just like they did me." Her words carried the weight of her own history. A logistics officer whose trust in the military had been shattered by an ambush that left her broken, her career a casualty of systems that failed when lives depended on them. Abigail knelt beside her mother, her voice soft, almost swallowed by the tank's rumble. "Mom, I'm not them. I'm not signing up. I'm just making things right. If I can fix this, it means fewer failures, fewer people hurt." Her eyes were steady, pleading, but the gap between them felt like a chasm, widened by every moment she spent proving herself in this military space. "Doctor." Harper approached, her notepad tucked away, her voice calm but deliberate. "Mrs. Carter, Abigail's fixes today have already improved this tank's reliability. Civilian engineers like her could prevent the kind of failures you experienced. There's a place for her talent, safe, off the battlefield." Her words were a lifeline, offering Margaret a way to reconcile her fears with her daughter's potential. Margaret's gaze flickered to Harper, her skepticism softening but not gone. She remembered her own pride in serving, the belief that her work saved lives, until the day it didn't. Her fingers loosened slightly on her armrests, her silence a tentative opening, a crack in the wall she'd built to protect Abigail. Voss's team replaced the coaxial cable, their movements swift, guided by Abigail's diagnosis. Klein tested the radio, the static replaced by a clear signal, the comms system humming with life. "We're back online," she announced, her voice carrying a mix of relief and respect as she climbed out of the turret. She approached Abigail, her eyes bright with curiosity. "You're making us look bad, Carter," she said, a half-smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "Where'd you learn to hear a machine like that?" Abigail's lips twitched, a faint smile betraying her restraint. "My dad. He said machines don't lie. You just have to listen to what they're saying." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of a legacy, her father's lessons etched into every fix she made. General Tate's expression remained guarded, his arms crossed, but his silence spoke of a shift. He addressed the delegation, his voice firm but less sharp. "The demonstration can proceed. Let's show the Secretary what this unit's capable of." His words were a command, but they carried a grudging acknowledgement of Abigail's role, a crack in his resistance to her presence. Harper made a note, her mind racing with possibilities, civilian training programs, research grants, a way to harness Abigail's talent without entangling her in the military's web. She turned to Margaret, her voice low. "Mrs. Carter, Abigail's skills could be developed through civilian channels. No uniforms, no deployments, just her mind, making a difference." She offered a folder, its pages outlining scholarships and engineering programs, a tangible promise of a safe path forward. Margaret took the folder, her fingers brushing the paper, her eyes scanning the text as if searching for a catch. The offer was a bridge, a way to honor Abigail's talent without surrendering her to the institution that had taken so much. But it meant letting go of the control she'd clung to since her injury, the shield that kept her daughter safe from a world that broke promises. As the tank rolled forward, its systems now flawless, a new figure emerged from the crowd. Chief Warrant Officer James Holt, a grizzled veteran with decades of experience in tank maintenance, approached with a slow, deliberate stride. His eyes, sharp under a weathered brow, fixed on Abigail. "You're Elias Carter's kid, aren't you?" he said, his voice rough but warm. "Heard you fixed 3 systems today. Your old man would have been proud." Abigail's throat tightened, the mention of her father stirring a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, Chief," she said, her voice soft but steady. I try to do what he taught me." Holt nodded, his gaze assessing, as if seeing her father's shadow in her steady hands. The demonstration continued, the tank maneuvering with precision, its systems singing under Klein's command. But a new tension simmered in the air, a murmur from the delegation about Abigail's role, their questions shifting from the tank's performance to the civilian who had saved it. Harper leaned toward Tate, her voice low. "General, we need to talk about integrating talent like hers. She's not just a fluke. She's a resource." Tate's jaw clenched, his instinct to maintain boundaries clashing with the evidence of Abigail's value. "Dr. Harper, civilians don't run military operations. Her contributions are noted, but this isn't a precedent." His words were firm, but they lacked the conviction of earlier, as if Abigail's skill had forced him to question his own rules. Margaret's eyes followed the tank, then returned to Abigail, who stood quietly, her face a mask of determination and vulnerability. The folder in Margaret's hands felt heavy, a promise of a future where Abigail could thrive without risking the losses she'd endured. But as the tank's turret swiveled, a faint grinding noise emerged, a subtle mechanical complaint that went unnoticed by most. Abigail's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing, her body tensing as if the sound were a personal challenge. The noise was faint, but to her it was a scream, a new puzzle demanding her attention, threatening to pull her deeper into a world her mother feared. The Fort Sill motor pool glowed under the fading Oklahoma sun, its light casting a bronze sheen across the M1 Abrams tank as it maneuvered with disciplined precision. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and dust, the evening heat settling like a heavy cloak. Yet a faint grinding noise, barely audible over the engine's roar, pierced the demonstration's rhythm, a mechanical whisper that set Abigail Carter's nerves alight. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her grease-streaked coveralls clinging to her frame, her eyes locked on the tank's turret. Her mother, Margaret, sat in her wheelchair nearby, clutching a folder of civilian engineering programs, her face etched with a fragile hope overshadowed by fear. The grinding sound was subtle, a fleeting complaint from the turret's rotation mechanism, unnoticed by most. Lieutenant Sarah Klein, commanding the tank, continued the demonstration, her movements crisp as she guided the machine through its paces for the Pentagon delegation. Master Sergeant Daniel Voss monitored from the ground, his diagnostic tablet glowing, showing all systems green. But Abigail heard it, the faint, irregular scrape, like a bone grinding in a socket. Her mind raced through the turret's components, gears, bearings, hydraulic actuators. The sound pointed to a worn slew bearing, a critical part that, if failing, could seize the turret entirely. Abigail's fingers twitched, her body leaning forward, drawn to the problem like a moth to flame. She knew the fix. Inspect the bearing, check for metal shavings, lubricate or replace if needed. But the weight of her mother's gaze held her back. Margaret's eyes were a storm of conflict, her hands tightening on the folder, as if it were a lifeline to keep Abigail from the military's grasp. The memory of Margaret's own loss, her legs, her career, her trust in the system hung between them, a silent warning. Chief Warrant Officer James Holt, standing nearby, caught Abigail's tension. His weathered face, lined from years of wrestling machines into submission, softened as he followed her gaze to the tank. "You hear something, don't you, Carter?" he said, his voice low, rough with the wisdom of experience. "Your dad had that same look when a machine was talking to him." Abigail nodded, her throat tight. "It's the slew bearing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's wearing down. If it's not addressed, the turret could lock up." Her words were precise, her certainty rooted in countless nights spent studying her father's annotated manuals, his handwritten notes on bearing failures vivid in her mind. Holt's eyes narrowed, assessing. He glanced at Voss, who was focused on the tablet, then back to Abigail. "That's a serious call." "You sure?" His tone held no doubt, only a need for confirmation, a mechanic's respect for precision. Before Abigail could answer, Margaret's voice cut through, sharp and raw. "Abigail, no more." Her wheelchair rolled closer, the gravel crunching under its wheels, her face pale with a mother's terror. "You've done enough. They don't need you to fix every little thing." Her words trembled, carrying the weight of her own shattered trust, her fear that each step Abigail took toward the tank was a step toward the life that had broken her. Abigail's chest tightened, her breath shallow. She felt the contradiction within her, absolute confidence in her diagnosis, shadowed by the dread of losing her mother's fragile trust. "Mom, if that bearing fails, it could strand a crew in the field. People could get hurt." Her voice was soft, pleading, her eyes searching Margaret's for a spark of understanding. Dr. Evelyn Harper, the Pentagon analyst, stood nearby, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She stepped forward, her voice calm but deliberate. "Mrs. Carter, Abigail's ability to identify these issues is rare. Her work could prevent the kind of failures that cost lives." She gestured to the folder in Margaret's hands. "There are civilian paths, research, design, that let her contribute without risk. She's already proving that." Margaret's gaze flickered to Harper, her skepticism a wall, but the words found a crack. She looked at the tank, its turret still moving, the grinding noise faint but persistent to those who knew to listen. Her fingers loosened on the folder, her silence a reluctant opening, as if she were weighing the possibility of Abigail's talent as a shield rather than a sword. Voss, catching the tail end of the conversation, approached Abigail, his tablet now showing a slight anomaly in the turret's performance data. "Carter, you said slew bearing?" His voice was low, urgent, his respect for her growing with each fix. "We're seeing some drag in the rotation. What's your read?" Abigail's pulse quickened, her mind mapping the bearing's location, its role in the turret's smooth arc. "Check for metal shavings in the grease," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of attention. "If they're present, the bearing's degrading. You'll need to lubricate it heavily or replace it before it seizes." She pointed to the turret's base, her finger tracing an invisible line to the problem. Voss nodded, motioning to his team. "Inspect the slew bearing, now." The mechanics moved with urgency, climbing onto the tank, their tools glinting in the fading light. Klein paused the demonstration, her face tense as she climbed out, joining Voss to oversee the inspection. The delegation murmured, their notes growing frantic, General Marcus Tate's jaw tightening as another flaw threatened his carefully orchestrated display. The mechanics worked swiftly, pulling a sample of grease from the bearing housing. One held up a rag, streaked with tiny silver flecks, metal shavings, the telltale sign of wear. "She's right," he called, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Bearing's starting to go." Voss's eyes met Abigail's, a nod of respect passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of her uncanny precision. General Tate's expression darkened, his arms uncrossed, hands clenched. "Sergeant, how many more issues are we going to find today?" His voice was sharp, but it lacked the earlier venom, as if Abigail's string of successes had forced him to recalibrate his disdain. Klein approached Abigail, her eyes bright with curiosity. "You're hearing things we're not," she said, her tone warm but probing. "How do you know the bearing's failing just from that sound?" Abigail's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through. "It's like a heartbeat skipping. My dad taught me to listen for the rhythm that's off." "The bearing's grinding because it's fighting itself." Harper made a note, her mind racing with possibilities. Civilian engineering programs, research grants, a way to channel Abigail's talent into systems that could save lives. She turned to Tate, her voice measured. "General, Abigail's diagnostics are saving your demonstration. We need to consider how to develop talent like hers, outside military ranks." Tate's jaw clenched, his instinct for order clashing with the evidence of Abigail's value. "Dr. Harper, civilians don't run our operations." "Her contributions are noted, but this isn't a training ground for amateurs." His words were firm, but they wavered, as if he were convincing himself as much as her. Margaret's voice broke the tension, low but piercing. "She's not your tool to use." Her wheelchair edged closer to Abigail, her eyes blazing with protective fire. "She's my daughter, not your mechanic." Her words were a shield, but they trembled with the fear of losing Abigail to the same system that had taken her legs, her pride, her trust. Abigail knelt beside her mother, her hand resting lightly on Margaret's arm, her voice soft but unyielding. "Mom, I'm not theirs. I'm doing this because I can, because it matters. If I can stop these machines from failing, it's not about them. It's about us." Her eyes were steady, a plea for trust in a moment where everything balanced on a knife's edge. The mechanics completed the lubrication, the turret's movement smoothing, the grinding noise fading into silence. Klein tested the controls, her nod confirming the fix. "Turret's back to full function," she announced, her voice carrying a mix of relief and admiration as she glanced at Abigail. The delegation scribbled furiously, Harper's eyes gleaming with the promise of what Abigail's talent could mean. As the demonstration resumed, the tank moving with renewed grace, a new figure approached. Captain Laura Bennett, a logistics officer who had served with Margaret years ago. Her uniform was crisp, her eyes soft with recognition as she saw her old friend. "Margaret," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "I heard about your daughter." "She's got Elias's gift." Her words stirred the air, a reminder of the legacy that bound Abigail to this place. Margaret's expression softened, the mention of her late husband cutting through her defenses. "She does," she admitted, her voice barely audible, her eyes on Abigail, who stood quietly, her face a mask of determination and vulnerability. The tank's roar filled the silence, but a new sound emerged, a faint hum from the engine bay, subtle but off, a fresh challenge that only Abigail seemed to hear. Her head snapped up, her body tensing, the machine calling to her again, threatening to pull her deeper into a world her mother feared, even as it offered a chance to prove her worth once more. The Fort Sill motor pool lay cloaked in the deepening twilight, the Oklahoma sky bruised with streaks of purple and gold. The M1 Abrams tank rolled through its paces, its turret swiveling with newfound precision, a testament to Abigail Carter's relentless skill. Yet a faint hum, irregular and low, pulsed from the engine bay, a subtle discord that pricked at Abigail's senses like a needle. Her grease-streaked coveralls clung to her frame, damp with the day's sweat, her hands flexing as if to grasp the sound itself. Her mother, Margaret, sat in her wheelchair, the folder of civilian engineering programs clutched tightly, her face a battlefield of pride and fear, her eyes fixed on Abigail with a desperate intensity. The hum was a whisper of trouble, likely the engine's auxiliary power unit struggling under a misaligned coupling, a problem Abigail had traced in her father's old notes. She knew the fix: tighten the coupling, check for wear. But the weight of her mother's gaze anchored her in place. Margaret's hands trembled on the folder, her silence louder than the tank's roar, a plea to step back from the military's pull, from the life that had stolen her legs and her trust. Lieutenant Sarah Klein, still in the tank's hatch, guided the machine through the demonstration's final maneuvers, her movements sharp despite the long day. Master Sergeant Daniel Voss stood nearby, his diagnostic tablet glowing, its data showing no critical alerts. But Abigail's ears caught what the tablet missed, the hum's uneven rhythm, a sign of strain that could escalate in the field. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, steady and sure. Machines don't lie, Abby. They tell you when they're hurting. You just have to be brave enough to listen. Captain Laura Bennett, Margaret's old comrade, stood close, her presence a quiet bridge between past and present. She's got your fire, Margaret, Bennett said softly, her eyes on Abigail. But she's carving her own path. Her words stirred the air, a reminder of the legacy that tied Abigail to this place, to her mother's service and her father's genius. Abigail's chest tightened, her breath shallow. She felt the contradiction within her, certainty in her diagnosis, shadowed by the fear of pushing her mother too far. She took a step toward the tank, then stopped, her eyes meeting Margaret's. "Mom," she said, her voice low but clear, "if I don't fix this, it could fail when it matters most. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for the people who rely on these machines." Her words were a plea, rooted in love and duty, a mirror of the courage Margaret had once shown in combat. Margaret's hands loosened on the folder, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She remembered her own days of service, the pride of ensuring her unit's safety, now buried under years of pain. "Abigail," she said, her voice trembling, "I just want you safe. This world, it takes more than it gives." Her words were a shield, but they wavered as if she were beginning to see her daughter's strength as something more than a risk. Dr. Evelyn Harper, the Pentagon analyst, stepped forward, her sharp eyes catching the family's tension. "Mrs. Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm, "Abigail's fixes today have already made this tank more reliable." Civilian programs could let her refine that skill, designing systems that don't fail soldiers like you. She gestured to the folder, its pages a promise of a future where Abigail could thrive without wearing a uniform. Voss, catching the hum now, frowned at his tablet, the data finally reflecting a slight anomaly in the auxiliary power unit. He glanced at Abigail, his scarred brow lifting. "Carter, you hearing something again?" His tone held no doubt, only respect, a mechanic's trust in her uncanny precision. Abigail nodded, her voice steady. "It's the APU coupling," she said, pointing to the engine bay. "It's misaligned, causing the hum. Tighten it and check for wear. If it's damaged, you'll need a replacement before it fails completely." Her words were precise, her certainty a quiet force that silenced the murmurs around her. General Marcus Tate, standing with the delegation, clenched his jaw, his arms uncrossed now, hands flexing as if wrestling with his own resistance. "Sergeant, verify her diagnosis," he ordered, his voice firm but lacking its earlier edge. Abigail's string of successes had eroded his dismissal, forcing him to confront her value, even as it challenged his need for control. Voss motioned to his team, who climbed into the engine bay, their tools glinting in the twilight. Klein paused the demonstration, her eyes finding Abigail's, a nod of respect passing between them. The mechanics worked swiftly, confirming Abigail's call within moments, a loose coupling, its bolts slightly worn, causing the irregular hum. "She's right again," one mechanic called, holding up the loosened component, his voice tinged with awe. Margaret's gaze softened, her hands relaxing on the folder as she watched the mechanics tighten the coupling, the hum fading into a steady purr. She saw her daughter's focus, the way Abigail's eyes tracked the tank's every movement, a mirror of her own intensity years ago. The memory of her service, its purpose, its cost, stirred, and she felt a crack in her fear, a space where pride could grow. Harper approached Margaret, her voice low. "Mrs. Carter, Abigail's talent could shape the future of military technology safely from a lab. The Pentagon has programs designed for this. She'd be an asset, not a soldier." Her words were a bridge, offering Margaret a way to support Abigail without surrendering her to the military's hunger. Margaret's eyes flicked to the folder, then to Abigail, who stood quietly, her face a mask of determination and vulnerability. "You're sure these programs keep her out of danger?" she asked, her voice soft but searching, as if testing the ground beneath her. "Guaranteed," Harper replied, her tone certain. "Research and development stateside. She'd design systems, not operate them." The promise was a lifeline, a way to honor Abigail's skill without repeating Margaret's losses. The tank's engine roared back to full power, the demonstration resuming with flawless precision. Klein guided the machine through its final maneuvers, her confidence restored by Abigail's fixes. The delegation scribbled notes, their murmurs now laced with excitement, Harper's pen moving fastest of all. She saw Abigail not as a civilian outlier, but as a catalyst for change, a challenge to rigid systems of talent recognition. General Tate's expression remained guarded, but his silence spoke of a shift. He addressed the delegation, his voice steady. "The unit's readiness is clear. Let's conclude the evaluation." His words were professional, but his glance at Abigail carried a grudging respect, a crack in his resistance to her presence. Captain Bennett stepped closer to Margaret, her voice soft. "She's not just Elias's daughter, Margaret. She's yours too. That strength, that focus, it's from you." Her words cut through Margaret's defenses, stirring memories of her own courage, now reflected in Abigail's quiet defiance. Abigail knelt beside her mother, her hand resting lightly on Margaret's arm. "Mom, I'm not trying to fight your battles. I'm trying to make sure no one else has to lose what you did." Her voice was soft, steady, a plea for trust that carried the weight of their shared history. Before Margaret could respond, a new sound emerged. A sharp clank from the tank's tracks, subtle but jarring, as it came to a stop. Klein frowned, climbing out, her voice rising. "Something's off with the track tension," she called to Voss. "It's not critical, but it's new." The delegation's murmurs grew sharper, Tate's face darkening as another flaw threatened the demonstration's perfection. Abigail's head snapped up, her ears attuned to the clank, her mind already tracing the track system's components. She knew the issue, a misadjusted idler wheel, likely loosened by the day's heavy use. Her body tensed, ready to step forward, but her mother's eyes held her, a silent question hanging between them. Would Abigail's next move heal their bond, or break it? The Fort Sill motor pool was bathed in the silver glow of early night, the Oklahoma stars piercing the sky like pinpricks of light. The M1 Abrams tank stood still, its tracks silent after a sharp clank had disrupted the demonstration's final moments. The air carried the faint scent of cooling metal and dust, the day's heat now a soft memory. Abigail Carter stood at the edge of the crowd, her grease-streaked coveralls a testament to her relentless skill, her hands clenched as the clank's echo lingered in her mind. Her mother, Margaret, sat in her wheelchair, the folder of civilian engineering programs clutched in her lap, her face a canvas of pride and fear, her eyes locked on Abigail with a fragile hope. The clank had come from the tank's track system, a misadjusted idler wheel, Abigail knew, thrown off by the day's heavy maneuvers. Her father's voice whispered in her memory, calm and certain. "Tracks are the tank's legs, Abby. If they're off, the whole beast stumbles." She could fix it, adjust the tension, check the wheel's alignment, but the weight of her mother's gaze held her, a silent plea to step back from the military's pull, from the life that had shattered Margaret's body and trust. Lieutenant Sarah Klein climbed from the tank, her face tense as she conferred with Master Sergeant Daniel Voss. "Track tension's loose," she said, her voice low but urgent. "It's not critical, but it's enough to cause problems in a real operation." Voss frowned, his diagnostic tablet showing a minor anomaly, his eyes flicking to Abigail with a now familiar trust. The Pentagon delegation, led by Dr. Evelyn Harper, watched with keen interest, their notebooks open, their murmurs a mix of concern and curiosity. General Marcus Tate's jaw tightened, his posture rigid, his authority tested by yet another flaw in his meticulously planned display. Abigail's pulse raced, her mind mapping the track system's components: idler wheel, tensioner, track pins. She knew the adjustment was simple, a matter of tightening the tensioner and checking for wear, but the stakes felt monumental. Each fix drew her deeper into a world her mother feared, yet each success was a step toward proving her worth, toward building a bridge between them. She took a half step forward, then stopped, her eyes meeting Margaret's. The silence between them was heavy, a crossroads where trust could either solidify or crumble. Voss caught her hesitation, his scarred brow lifting. "Carter, you got a read on this?" His voice was steady, a mechanic's respect for her skill overriding protocol. The mechanics nearby paused, their tools still, their eyes on Abigail, waiting for her to claim the moment or retreat. Abigail's chest tightened, her breath shallow. She felt the contradiction within her, absolute certainty in her diagnosis, shadowed by the fear of losing her mother's fragile acceptance. "It's the idler wheel," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the night air. "The tensioner's loose from the day's stress. Adjust it and check the wheel for wear." She pointed to the tank's undercarriage, her finger steady, her certainty a quiet force. Klein's eyes narrowed, her hands on her hips. "You're sure it's not the track pins?" Her tone was probing, but her respect for Abigail's track record was clear. "Pins would clank differently," Abigail replied, her voice calm but firm. "This is the idler wheel fighting the tension. I've seen it in my dad's notes." Voss nodded, motioning to his team. "Check the idler wheel." The mechanics moved swiftly, crawling under the tank, their tools glinting in the floodlights. Captain Laura Bennett, Margaret's old comrade, stood nearby, her eyes soft with recognition. "She's got your strength, Margaret," she said quietly. "But she's doing this her way, not yours." Her words were a gentle nudge, a reminder of the legacy that bound Abigail to her mother's courage. Margaret's hands trembled on the folder, her eyes glistening as she watched Abigail. "She's risking too much," she whispered, her voice raw with fear. "This place, it takes everything." Her words carried the weight of her own losses, her legs, her career, her faith in the system, yet they wavered, as if Abigail's persistence was cracking her resolve. Abigail knelt beside her mother, her hand resting lightly on Margaret's arm. "Mom, I'm not risking anything. I'm fixing what's broken so no one else gets hurt. This isn't about joining them, it's about making things safer." Her voice was soft, steady, a plea for trust, rooted in love and purpose. "Dr. Harper approached, her notepad tucked away, her voice deliberate. "Mrs. Carter, Abigail's work today could redefine equipment reliability. Civilian programs can channel her talent into designing systems that protect soldiers, not endanger them." She gestured to the folder, its pages a promise of a future where Abigail could thrive without wearing a uniform. Margaret's gaze softened, her fingers loosening on the folder as she looked at Abigail, seeing not just her daughter but the echo of her own determination, tempered by her late husband's quiet genius. "You're sure this is safe?" she asked Harper, her voice cautious but open, testing the ground. "Absolutely," Harper replied, her tone certain. "Research labs, not battlefields. Her mind is the asset, not her presence in combat." The promise was a lifeline, offering Margaret a way to support Abigail without surrendering her to the military's hunger. The mechanics confirmed Abigail's diagnosis, adjusting the tensioner and finding slight wear on the idler wheel. "She's right," one called, his voice tinged with awe as he tightened the bolts. The clank vanished, the tracks settling into smooth alignment. Klein tested the controls, the tank moving with precision, its systems singing. "Tracks are solid," she announced, her nod to Abigail a silent thank you. General Tate's expression eased, his arms uncrossing, a grudging respect in his eyes. "Well done, Sergeant," he said to Voss, his voice steady but carrying an acknowledgement of Abigail's role. The delegation scribbled notes, Harper's pen moving fastest, her mind racing with plans to integrate Abigail's talent into civilian programs. Bennett stepped closer to Margaret, her voice soft. "She's not replacing you, Margaret. She's honoring you, your service, your sacrifice, by making things better." Her words stirred Margaret's memories of her own pride in serving, now reflected in Abigail's quiet courage. Abigail stood, her eyes on the tank, its tracks now silent, its systems flawless. She felt the weight of her mother's gaze, the delegation's scrutiny, the mechanic's respect. Each fix had been a step toward proving herself, but also a step toward healing the rift with her mother. She turned to Margaret, her voice soft. "Mom, I'm doing this because of you, not despite you. Your strength taught me to keep going, no matter what." Margaret's eyes glistened, her hands releasing the folder entirely as if letting go of her fear. "Abby," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm scared, but I'm proud." "I see you now." Her words were a bridge, fragile but real, built on the day's triumphs and Abigail's relentless skill. Harper approached, offering Margaret a card. "This program starts next semester. Full scholarship, civilian engineering. Abigail's already qualified." Margaret took the card, her fingers steady now, her eyes on her daughter, seeing a future where Abigail's talent could shine without the risks she'd endured. As the demonstration concluded, the tank rolling to a stop, the crowd erupted in restrained applause, the delegation's murmurs now laced with excitement. Tate addressed them, his voice formal. "Fort Sill's readiness is proven. Thank you for your evaluation." His glance at Abigail was brief but significant, a nod to her impact, however reluctant. A new figure emerged from the dispersing crowd. Dr. Samuel Reed, a civilian engineer with the Army Research Lab, his glasses glinting under the floodlights. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice warm. "Your diagnostics today were extraordinary. We could use your insight in our lab. No uniform, just your mind." His offer was a final spark, a confirmation of Abigail's place in a world that needed her skill. Margaret wheeled closer to Abigail, her hand reaching out, finding her daughter's. "Abby," she said, her voice steady now, "I'm ready to support you. Not because they need you, but because you're you." The words were a vow, a healing of wounds, a promise of unity. Abigail squeezed her mother's hand, tears prickling her eyes. The tank stood silent behind her, its systems perfected by her hands, a testament to her courage and her father's legacy. But the true victory was the bond she'd forged with her mother, a bridge built on trust, not just skill. As the stars brightened above, Abigail felt a quiet certainty. She had proven her worth, not just to the military, but to the family that mattered most, setting the stage for a future where her talent could shine, safe from the dangers her mother feared.